It has been very frustrating, I'm not going to lie. Being stuck all the way down in Brighton and not having, especially like when you get to a high level and there's just like no one for me to train with. Because we're all competitive, and as much as we're all friends, and I am friends with a lot of people that I compete against, you don't want to fucking lose to someone from another gym.
If you're rolling with these people that you have the possibility of competing against, are you bringing the
Yeah.
A game, or are you kind of like letting them build confidence, like, oh, I beat Ollie in rounds at the gym, so I'm not worried about competing against him now?
Nah, mate, it's war, just war every single time. Everyone's doing all these crazy warm-ups, and I just like find a corner and I just fall asleep, and I get my coach to wake me up half an hour before one of my matches.
So, all right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Elbows Tight Podcast. It's your host, Travis. Today, I have a friend from across the pond over in the UK, Mr. Ollie Webb. How you doing today, dude?
I'm good, sir. How you doing?
I am great. I'm super excited to talk to you. We have a mutual friend like we talked about before, Ben, who's your roommate. He's probably sleeping right now, isn't he?
Funnily enough, he's just broken his collarbone on a
Oh,
skiing holiday. So he's gone home. So, because we can't all look after him as much as his parents probably can. So he's decided to run back home and ask his mum for some help. So I'm actually in his room right now. So yeah, thanks, Ben.
yeah. I saw that on his Instagram, and I was like, oh, man, that does not look fun at all. So, but hey, for people that don't know who you are at home, I'm really excited about this because your background and who you are in the jiu-jitsu scene right now, up and coming. So let's go ahead and get into like who you are and how you got into jiu-jitsu and everything.
Yeah, man. So I've just turned 24. I'm from Brighton in the south of England, which is basically 1 hour south of London. Um, I've been training jiu-jitsu 5 years. I'm a brown belt under Yusuf Nabi. And yeah, I've trained all across the world. I got back into jiu-jitsu. I got into jiu-jitsu back when I was just turned 19. So it hasn't been that long of a journey, really. Um, but yeah, I essentially grew up boxing. My dad owned a boxing gym growing up. He's also a Buddhist and used to be a Buddhist monk before he owned a boxing gym. So that was a strange combination. But yeah, so I started boxing when I was like 11, and then kind of was in and out of that. And then I got playing rugby, and then I got into skateboarding. I wanted to be a professional skateboarder. So I did a lot of stuff that was like physical, nothing. I mean, it's hard to emulate jujitsu. I don't think there's that many things that you do. I mean, rugby is probably the closest thing I've done to jujitsu before I did it. Um, but I felt like all of them including skateboarding, had their sort of individual benefits before starting training jiu-jitsu, basically. And then yeah, I was like listening to loads of podcasts and listening to Joe Rogan and stuff like that. I wanted to get back into it. I mean, I saw a lot of people growing up who had a shitload of head trauma and stuff, obviously. And we had like journeymen who'd come in and they'd forget things, and I just was like, oh, shit. I really wanted to be able to fight. That was like my main thing, but I didn't want to get head trauma. So I found jiu-jitsu and I started doing it, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do this 3 times a week. And then sort of within 3 months, I was like, shit, I'm extremely competitive. And I was like, I realized there was no way I was going to keep doing jiu-jitsu without trying to become as good as I possibly could at doing it. That's just kind of my personality with anything, to be honest. But yeah, just before jiu-jitsu, I used to be a professional musician as well. I used to play drums in bands, and I used to do session work and stuff like that. So yeah, quite different to jiu-jitsu, but also it's basically me just avoiding having a normal job. So it's still quite similar in that way, which I've succeeded doing up until now. So that's good. But yeah, so I pretty much trained almost full time. I pretty much quit music school about 6 months after starting jiu-jitsu, and just put everything into jiu-jitsu. And so that's probably one of the biggest reasons for me progressing quite quickly.
So
Yeah.
you right after you started, you were like, I need to take this seriously, and you jumped head first into it as a white belt, competing, trying to train as much as possible, and just ingesting as much jiu-jitsu as possible.
Yeah, pretty much. I definitely train a lot smarter now. I'm a brown belt than I was when I was a white belt. But back then I was like, okay, I'm just going to go as hard as I can all the time. Lift weights, sprint, run, do everything I possibly can, and probably just like killed myself. And then obviously over the years, your training methodologies get smarter and smarter and more efficient. But yeah, I mean, like I I didn't know if I was going to be professional or anything, but I was like, I'd get so pissed off about losing that I was like, I have to get good at this. I have to get to the point where I'm not just getting fucked up. But even like brown and black belts, are like I couldn't stand getting tapped by people. So I was like, oh no, this isn't good because now I'm just going to put all my time into it, and that's what I did. And luckily, it worked out. I mean, jiu-jitsu still isn't as much of a professional sport as I wish it was, and what I think it will be. But it's I think if you dedicate yourself enough and get to a high enough level, you can obviously make yourself into you can make a good career out of it even now.
Yeah, it's definitely come quite a ways from even the time that I've been doing jiu-jitsu. I've been doing jiu-jitsu about the same time, and I'm still a blue belt. So just to tell
Okay,
you how bad I suck at jiu-jitsu, but it's like,
I know some tough blue belts, but yeah,
what'd you say?
I said I know some tough blue belts. You might be one of them.
Yeah, but I mean, it's back when I first started. ADCC wasn't nearly as big as it is now. There was IBJJF wasn't even up in the Pacific Northwest. Now it's up here. And a lot of it changed, and I think people are starting to realize, especially with other bigger organizations like the UFC, Combat Karate, all these other organizations trying to get into jiu-jitsu to make it bigger. Now it's starting to open up more doors for people like yourself who want to do it full time, have the passion for it, the time for it, and they can really start making it a big part of their life and their main income outside of like instructionals and stuff like that. Where do you see the industry having to go in order for more people to be able to do it full time?
Oh yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think um, the UFC Fight Pass Invitational is a really good one because it drives a lot of the UFC fan base into it, and it's like the biggest martial arts fan base in the world right now. So I think that's really good. I like the rule set too. I don't think it's too boring. I know it's EBI overtime, and some people don't like that. I'm pretty sure it's EBI overtime
Hmm.
anyway. I might be wrong on that actually, but either way, every show I've watched of them just looks so professional, so good. They've all the athletes look professional, and I think it just stands out from most normal grappling shows. That one's really good. I think the what one championships are doing, if I'm not wrong, they have like sometimes they'll have jujitsu fights on the same nights as MMA fights. So then people are basically forced to watch jujitsu, which is good. If we can just keep forcing people to watch jujitsu, that's always a good one. But and they're giving out big paydays to athletes too. I mean, I'm pretty sure Mikey Musumeci got like a 50K bonus for a sub once. So just like as many of those big organizations, is really helpful. And then I think as time goes on, a lot of people in the fitness industry are getting involved. Obviously, Joe Rogan's like a big part of that because he's got such a big voice and he does it. But obviously, you've got people like Jocko Willink and stuff with podcast platforms, praising jujitsu, and now like lots of other people are getting into it. And I think the more sort of for the younger people, I think the YouTube sphere is going to be really important. So I know someone called Bradley Martin did a couple videos of him getting thrown around by like a really good brown belt, and that got tons and tons of hits. I think as many people who can get like in the YouTube sphere as possible is going to be really good. So just using basically other people with high platforms, whether that be the UFC, One Championships, or just fitness athletes or anyone who has got nothing to do with jiu-jitsu and using their fan base as a way of boosting jiu-jitsu because jiu-jitsu is an extremely interesting sport. It's extremely addictive. Everyone I know who's done it pretty much every one of my friends now does jiu-jitsu pretty much and they all love it and it's a big part of their life. You just can't not be interested in not only the benefits it gives you mentally, physically, but also like the community aspect and the camaraderie and all of that. It's like it's hard to not want to do it, when you start doing it. So I just think we need to open as many eyes to it, and I think that's happening. And yeah, it's an exciting time, because it's blowing up. It's not where I want it to be. I mean, some part of me wishes I was younger and I started jiu-jitsu 10 years later, but I can't change that, and that's fine. So it is still an exciting time.
What was it like competing for the first time in jiu-jitsu, having like that competitive background in boxing and just naturally growing up?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first time I had zero nerves whatsoever. Um, I was just like, yeah, let's do this. And then it was so hard that the second time when I went back, I was terrified. And it actually took me a while to, um, get used to competing again. I think like, I'm never afraid of being hurt in jiu-jitsu ever. The only thing I'm ever afraid of is underperforming because I just have such a high standard for myself. And I've always expected probably more for myself than I could actually achieve, which, in one sense is maybe not good because I might not always achieve goals I set out. But I think if you aim high, where you end up because of having high goals, is better than if you hadn't had those high goals. So um, I don't regret that. But yeah, basically the first time I did a white belt competition like 1 month in or 2 months in, and I won it somehow with zero jujitsu and just willpower alone. Um, but and it wasn't like I wasn't fully addicted to I liked winning, but I wasn't like, oh, this is like extremely addicting either. I just thought, wow, that was really hard, and I need to overcome that, you know. So I think more the motivation of overcoming my fear rather than like, oh, I really love having this gold medal around my chest, um, was what motivated me to keep going.
So when you first competed, did you have a coach there with you that was like talking you through it, or were you just kind of like figuring it out as you were going?
Yeah, so my coach, Yusuf Nabi, was there, and he was talking me through every step, and I pretty much just did exactly what he said, which is funny because now I go and coach people, and I especially at like white and blue belt, and I'm telling them what to do, and they just completely ignore me, and it's so frustrating. But for some reason, I was like, okay, I'm an idiot. I know nothing. I'm just going to listen to everything he says, and I pretty much just did what he said, and I won. So definitely works. Yeah.
Yeah, I've only competed one time, and I'm sure everyone at home is tired of me talking about it. But I didn't have a coach there, so I was just listening to what my opponent's coach was saying and trying to counter what he was saying. And I think that's like good and bad because I would stop whatever he was trying to do, but I wasn't mounting an offense because I was so worried about what he was doing. When you're competing, how do you battle that line or tote that line of like having a game plan and going for what you want, but stopping what you think your opponent's trying to do?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it depends because sometimes you're in a tournament and you don't know exactly who you're going to go up against, and sometimes you don't know who the people are, even if you do know who you're going up against. And then sometimes competing on a super fight, for example, when I competed on Polaris, like I knew the person's game quite well. If I know the opponent, I'm going to basically um, come up with a tactical game as as accurate as I possibly can, and I'll have a sort of A, B, and C game. Um, and then, but whether you're fighting someone where you've game planned for it or where you haven't, I think it's important to have a feeling out stage to some degree. Like I think you should always try and get to your attacks first. But I think someone like Owen O'Flanagan is really really good at this. Just you have so one good example is say you're in headquarters, and I'm stealing from Owen O'Flanagan here, but you go for a knee cut and you notice that um, when you go for the knee cut, he's defending it. So then you go for a back step, and then as you back step, you're noticing that he's opening his elbow. So now you can fake the back step and start going for a knee cut because his elbow's out and you can get an underhook. Stuff like that. I think it's important for the first like minute or two to be able to feel out your opponent, read what they're kind of trying to do, and then from there start mounting offense, even when you have a game plan, because you don't want to just start going in and doing random attacks that you think are going to work. You have to actually build reactions and build your offense off of like setups and stuff like that. So I think the best thing to do is always have a game plan if you can, but then be ready to adapt and be ready to, read your opponent as well as you can, as soon as you can, because they're trying to read you too. So the game is kind of like you're trying to understand your opponent before they understand you, and then immediately start attacking off of that. And sometimes you might know your opponent so well just from watching tape that you can just go out and attack immediately. But I think, yeah, that feeling out process is underrated, I would say.
What's the biggest difference besides obviously skill and experience from when you first started competing to now? I know a lot of people when they first start competing, nerves get to them. They gas out within the first 30, 45 seconds of their match. They'll lock onto grips and hold on for dear life. Like, what's the biggest thing that's changed outside of just your experience from doing jujitsu in competing?
Mhm. Um, well, are you talking about more my preparation or like how I deal with it mentally on the day?
Let's do it with mentally. Like when it comes to competition day, how is it different now?
Oh, it's completely different. It doesn't feel that different to me than a hard round in the gym. And to be honest, because when I've trained with the best guys in the world, like I have, I think I've probably got more nervous for some of my rounds in the gym than I have competing. And I just think it's an it mm, it's a hard journey to go across. It's a hard journey to, especially if you're someone who gets nervous competing. Some people don't get nervous competing, but I think if you really care about trying to perform to your best, you are going to get nervous. And it's not about being a pussy. It's just about you care about doing well. And that's, I think it's always more impressive to me when someone completely prepares, does everything they can, and then loses than someone who doesn't fully prepare and wins. Because to me, that you're opening up a uh, what's the word, like you're giving yourself a crutch for if you lose, you're like, oh, okay, well, I didn't prepare as hard as I can. So I think the people who are really honorable and actually really trained to win are the people who get nervous, and I think that's normal. And I think it's actually a very hard battle to come across. I think everyone has their individual process. For me, I like to be pretty much as relaxed as possible. So I will often fall asleep on the mats before I compete, generally. And my so everyone's doing all these crazy warm ups, and I just like find a corner and I just fall asleep, and I get my coach to wake me up half an hour before one of my matches, and then I get up and I warm up slowly. I don't just like start running and jumping and all that stuff. That's just my personal thing. That's the way I find that works for me. And my head coach has a completely different process to me. One of my other coaches, Dom, has a completely different process to me, and I just think you have to experiment with different things um, in order to find how you can be comfortable competing. And one thing that really helps me is I like to just think of a match as a set of technical objectives. I like almost completely dehumanize my opponent and dehumanize the whole experience, but I just go, I have a set of technical objectives to overcome. I'm going to go for these specific moves. He can counter them in these specific ways, and then I might have to, react to that in a specific way. And I think when you do it like that, you handle nerves much better, because I remember John Danaher saying that matches aren't won on drama, they're not won on emotion, they're won on the mundane technical things you do in the gym every single day. And I think when you remember that, you realize like, oh well, there's no point in me getting completely emotional and like tied up in this thing, and and yeah. So for me, that was the main thing, just normalizing it and dehumanizing it. That's the main thing.
So you mentioned in there that you're kind of like going through your game plan before you actually step on the match. What are you like in your head going through besides just like techniques? Are you like visualizing the role on how you want to execute it, how it's going to actually go? Like you're trying to go step for step, like how it could possibly go, or you just like queuing up techniques or moves or situations that you know you can react to?
Well, I have like a lot of specific positions, especially like in the stand up position that I like to get to. One of them is underhooks, the other one. So I have sort of like three main, um, if you imagine it like this, like I have three main like objective, like technical objectives, and then from there there's like a tree of options from there, you know. So I generally try and get to. I know I'm very very confident that I can get to, for example, an underhook. I know I'm very confident, for example, I can get to a 2-on-1. Um, if they're on the floor, my main objective is to so saying they're in seated guard, my main objective is to try and get them on their back or step inside their legs, and either with a cross hamstring or same side hamstring. So I have like very specific, clear goals, to get to initially, and then I have a whole load of techniques to get from to go to from those specific positions. So the main thing I'm thinking about is getting to those positions, and then my afterthought is what can I do from those positions, and what can they do as well, obviously.
You met you recently went to B team, like we talked about beforehand, because you love training with like the best guys in the world. What was that experience like walking in there, knowing that you're getting ready for ADCC? Those other guys are going to be in there, you know, some of the top guys in the world. Like, what was that experience like leading up to actually your first class with them?
Yeah, it was awesome, man. I mean, I've been to B team before, so I knew what it was like. I'm always interested because most of the time I'm training with people who aren't as good as me. So it's always nice going to another gym and I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to do against these guys compared to how I did last time? You know, these guys are the best guys in the world. If I'm doing good against them, I'm going to do well against everyone else. So it's always like, okay, well, we'll see what happens, you know? And as I said, I've trained there before. I've trained at Roker with John Danaher. So I've trained with all the best guys in the world. So I wasn't nervous or anything like that. But unfortunately, I basically had COVID. Like I'm not sure how long ago, but a month ago, and I have some weird symptoms of long COVID, so I wasn't like on top form. But the experience was awesome. Everyone was super friendly. I think some people get worried that it's like a it's a professional gym and they're not that welcoming, but that wasn't my experience at all. The reason I went to B team instead of going back to Roker was because they have a lot more guys my size. So they've got like Ethan Credenston, who's like my size, even though he competes at 66, and Damien and Nicky Ryan's close to my size now. So they basically just have the best in the world at my size, and I love the format of the way they teach and stuff as well. So it was awesome, man. I felt really good. My jiu-jitsu feels really good. My physical condition wasn't quite where I'd want it to be to get the most out of the experience. Um, but overall, it's amazing. I mean, you're always just learning things that um, I think, you know, you're learning small techniques because there's a lot of, I know a lot of jiu-jitsu, so I'm always learning new things when I'm there. And it's cool to learn it in a class environment instead of having to learn it off an instructional that I paid for and stuff like that. So yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, because your Curtin Academy is a smaller academy over in the UK, like you mentioned. You don't have like the best guys in the world there, which is okay, but you're still finding a way to compete at the highest level, even coming from a smaller academy. What makes you think, or what in your journey or in your day to day training allows you to compete at such a high level, even though you don't have world class? No offense to your teammates, but like if you don't have
Yeah.
world class athletes.
hmm well, what I'd say, first of all, I would say like my coach and my assistant coach have done very well. So I would say that Yusuf, my main coach, did very well in the gi. Obviously, because he did well in the gi, he's not really a no gi athlete. The one person who has done well is Dominic Dillon, who's competed on Polaris a bunch of times. I would definitely say he's a world class 66 athlete, but he's the only one. And also now he's like got kids and stuff like that. So I'm pretty much the only one who's like fully dedicated to jiu-jitsu right now, just to be fair to them. But yeah, the main thing I would say is like I made a decision that's what I was going to do. So I'd say that's the main thing. I was like, that this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to become high level, and I'm going to make the most out of what I have. So I think that attitude, when you have that attitude, you'll find ways around it. But more specifically, um, the main thing I would say is traveling to other gyms and constantly traveling to other gyms. So I'll train up at London Grapple as much as I can. I'm about to start training at Hodger Gracie HQ in London as much as I can. I trained up at Owen O'Flanagan's gym in London. There's a lot of good gyms in London, which isn't too far. But obviously, I'm teaching and I'm doing privates and stuff, so it can be a bit of a nightmare. And then, of course, I've trained out in America a lot of times, so I know where I stand against like good grapplers over there. In terms of my sort of training methodology, it comes down to watching loads of footage, um, watching lots of instructionals, and the way I train. So like putting myself in bad positions, just not smashing everyone all the time. I mean, if you look at Hodger Gracie, I'm not exactly at what point in his career it was, but he came over to London, England, and he was only training with white and blue belts. And then I'm pretty sure he won his biggest titles after that point. So there's a lot you can learn from just rolling with people who are lower level than you. it has been very frustrating. I'm not going to lie, being stuck all the way down in Brighton and not having, especially like when you get to a high level and there's just like no one for me to train with, who from my gym. It's been very frustrating, but luckily I've been, able to get out to a lot of the better gyms as well. Um, and yeah, just constantly working on it, filming myself, and like taking an honest look at where I'm at and exactly what issues I need to face, and constantly asking myself the question: if I was a grappler who wanted to beat Ollie Webb, how would I do it? I know I talked about myself in the third person like Nicky Rod does there, but
I'm not judging.
but it's got to be done in terms of development. Is helpful, so it does make sense.
So what did your
Those are the
self
main things.
what does your self study look like then? When you mentioned instructionals, looking at tape and whatnot, how do you navigate instructionals, especially in a time where we can all be inundated with jujitsu techniques and information and whatnot? Like, how do you navigate all that?
Yeah, I mean, the most ideal way would be to assess your jiu-jitsu, look at where you really need to work on, which is generally the defensive side of jiu-jitsu for most grapplers. But you look at that and then you choose an instructional that specifically targets your weakness. But to be honest, I'll try and do that. But I think the most important thing is getting an instructional that you really want to learn and
Mm.
that, you know, entices you to stay with it. I think it's just like getting into a book. If you pick up a book and you get into it, you'll read the whole thing and you'll remember it. And I just think I would encourage people to find an instructional they really want to learn and then try and get into it and give it a little bit of time. And then once you get into it, there's little things you can do. Like one thing I'll do is just use my screen record function on my phone. I've got like 20 folders on my phone of specific areas of jiu-jitsu. It's extremely autistic, but it works. And you have these little clips, and then you go to drilling, and then you just like use the screen recording to go over things. As far as like self-assessment, I'm pretty lucky because I have a like really good memory. So when I'm rolling with people, I can generally remember like almost everything that happened in the roll. Don't know why, but it's very useful for jiu-jitsu. So it's really good for self-assessment. I can generally just think back to a roll that I've just had and go, okay, well, this happened, this happened, this happened. And I'm sure a lot of high-level guys have that too, because you're used to exchanges and certain things stick out to you and all of that kind of thing. So as you get more high level, that helps a lot. But I would recommend for like lower level people, absolutely film yourself if you can. Film yourself. It's a horrible, painstaking process to watch yourself do jiu-jitsu because a lot of things you think you're really good at, you're not. But then at the same time, you'll see things that you've done well that you didn't think you did well when you were doing it. So yeah, I would say try and break down instructional. Find an instruction you love, break it down into smaller bite-sized pieces, and then film yourself rolling to self-assess where your actual issues are.
Yeah, I tell people all the time you should film yourself rolling. I used to do it a lot more than I do now. But I feel like that's a great way to do it. Not only that, but there's a lot of communities and people out there that will review your footage for you. Say if you're a lower level practitioner and you don't know what you're looking at, there's plenty of people out there that will review it for you and help you out. Or even
Yeah,
being able to go to your coach and say, hey, I did this during the roll. How do I stop this? Or what did I do wrong here? How did they get this or whatever? So it's a great way to really level up and expedite your skill acquisition if you know what you're doing wrong, and you could show someone right then and there, like, hey. So when it comes to your
yes.
like perfect class, when you are trying to get your skill up as much as possible, say before like ADCC right now, rounds of rolling versus practicing technique or drilling or whatever, what percentage are you looking at in each class?
So it's a good question. I think I'll go through phases of training. So most of the time, if I'm not preparing for a specific event or competition, I will be spending probably 70% of my time rolling with people who are not as good as me or like getting slightly close to my level and working on specific things, whether that's defensive parts of my jiu-jitsu, whether that's attacks, whether that's just wrestling, whatever it is. And just trying to think as much as I can about what I'm doing when I'm rolling and be as intentional as I possibly can and do things as perfectly as I possibly can to like reaffirm the muscle memory. And then the other percentage of the time is like harder, intenser rolling with like better people at different gyms and stuff like that. And then the closer it gets to competition, that that percentage evens out a little bit, and then it becomes more like hard rounds are the majority of what I'm doing, and then skill work is like slightly less. But yeah, that's just to get myself physically primed for whatever I'm doing, and get myself mentally ready as well. But I would say like most of the majority of my time is spent doing a high volume of like skill work, and obviously it can be intense as well. But let's say if I do, I will generally do 6 to 8 rounds of sparring each session, and I would say most of the time I'm doing sort of like 5 rounds or 4 rounds, like of like figuring out exactly what I'm doing and being technical, and then the other sort of 2 rounds going a bit harder. But also, I've dealt with so many injuries that I think for me it's more important to get as much volume in as I can and work on skill as much as I can and not be injured and not be in the best physical condition and then get in better condition when it's closer to competition than just, going pretty hard, like pretty regularly, because I just, for some reason, my body just explodes. I don't know what it is. I don't know, maybe there's something in the water down here, but um, yeah.
Yeah, I just did a video recently. There was someone that posted on Reddit about how he accidentally broke his training partner's neck during a roll. He went the a purple belt had him in case of katami, so he like trapped an arm and then like bridged to do the reversal to get back into side control. You know what I mean? And
Oh
the
yeah,
guy posted on his head and heard a loud snap or a loud crack and broke the guy's neck, and it was a complete accident. And
yeah.
how do you handle injuries when you're in the training room, right? And it's obviously an accident or whatever, because injuries during competition are completely different than in the training room. How do you handle injuries in the training room when you're like ramping up for a competition?
Are you talking about like my personal injuries, or like if I see one of my students
Like
get
like
injured, for
you,
example?
like your personal injuries. How are you okay? How do you come at it like mentally, knowing that you're preparing for a competition and you get injured in training or whatever, right? And not and how do you handle all that? Because I know it can be frustrating because you're like, man, I got Polaris coming up, I got a competition coming up. Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, it sucks, man. I mean, I would say the first thing that's going through my head is how bad is it and can I still compete with it? And I think everyone's threshold for that is different. I've competed with broken ankles, broken toes.
Wow.
I've competed with a torn pec, um, like not a full tear, obviously, but like a partial tear and stuff like that. So I think like you can work around certain injuries to a certain degree, and you just have to be smart about how you do it. Um, but sometimes it's completely out of your control, and you just can't do anything, and you're off the mats, and that's fucking it. And I think I think you just have to understand that everyone who's been at a high level has had those experiences. Like Gordon Ryan, um, before 2019 ADCC, I think he either tore his ACL or something, and he had surgery on his knee, and he only got back to rolling about 12 weeks, maybe 8 weeks before he went and won ADCC. So I think you shouldn't always just count yourself out. And I think the main thing you should do is keep your mind occupied with jujitsu. So come into the gym as much as you can, study tape as much as you can. And what generally happens after you have an injury and you come back is you're so excited to do jujitsu again that you have this massive growth spurt in ability, because you've learned all this stuff and you want to try it out. And then you get back to jujitsu and you start figuring things out again. And some of the times where I've gotten way better than I would have done if I hadn't got injured was when I had that take time off the mat. So it comes with its pros and cons, but I just think the main thing to remember is, because you always feel like as an athlete you have a certain amount of years to make it, and and when you get injured, you're like, shit, this is 6 months out. And now all my opponents that are training are going to get better. And I'm going to come back and they're going to fuck me up. But they might get injured, and everyone who does jiu-jitsu gets injured. That's the one thing about start like that I get people to start jiu-jitsu. I got my dad to start jiu-jitsu, for example, which is great, but he's like 50 something and he's been doing jiu-jitsu for about 8 months and he's had 2 surgeries.
Oh
So
wow.
sometimes you have to deal with the guilt of basically breaking your friends' bodies apart by telling them to do jiu-jitsu. Um, but it's just it's part of the gig basically. So you've just got to be prepared for it, and then you've just got to go, okay, well, I'm not going to waste this time. Like an athlete would do in an off season, do everything you possibly can to make sure when you get back on the mats again, you're ready to go.
Yeah, when you go drop in at these other academies, are you doing it when you're injured too, or are you kind of using that? Are you trying to save going to these other academies for these like harder, more skilled rounds? Are you trying to save that for when your body's a little bit more, I guess, ready or primed or recovered from it?
Yeah. When I go to other gyms, unless it's a gym I've been to like a lot and I know the people well, I wouldn't go to another gym if I was injured. It's just too risky because it's just the nature of sometimes you're rolling with people who you might potentially compete against at some point as well. And I just think it's too risky to go into a feral gym. you know, because we're all competitive, and as much as we're all friends, and I am friends with a lot of people that I compete against, you don't want to fucking lose to someone from another gym, and yeah, so I would advise not doing that unless you're like really good friends with them. Yeah, that's what I would say.
That brings up a good point too, because there's a guy here in the United States down in Arizona called Matthew Gillette, and he's got like this year or last year he had like 100 and something gold medals in IBJJF, like
Wow.
at black
Well,
belt
in 1 year,
in 1 year at black belt, right?
you had
And
100 medals.
yeah,
Fucking hell,
crazy. This
crazy.
guy is incredible competitor, and
Wow.
or maybe it wasn't. It was up there. Maybe not 100, maybe less than 100, but it was quite a few. And I talked to him about, when you're competing and like say like you just mentioned, you go to other academies that you might compete against these people. How should you roll there when you're rolling with these people that you have the possibility of competing against? Are you bringing the
Yeah.
A game, or are you kind of like playing, letting them build confidence? Like, oh, I beat Ollie in rounds at the gym, so I'm not worried about competing against him now.
Nah, mate, it's war. Just war every single time. Fuck it. They're not getting shit on me. There's no way I'm letting someone from another gym get anything on me. No, I mean like, no, in all seriousness, I'm respectful to people, and I'm always cool. I'm not going to wrench on a submission or anything like that. And to be honest, it's kind of like a feeling out process. If I'm rolling with someone and they feel like they want to go a bit lighter, I'll go lighter with them. Um, but yes, I've definitely gone to other gyms and just tried to smash everyone many times, and I think it's really beneficial for you, and I think it's beneficial for them as well. And when people come in I love when people come in to the gym from other places and try and sort of challenge me and stuff. I think it's fun, and I think it's important for your students to see, and I think it prepares you for competition, and I think it prepares you for life. I just think it's a cool thing to be able to do, to just like competing against other tribes and other places. It's just I think it's part of the nature of what drives us to do jiu-jitsu. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Do you ever have a battle but in yourself from wanting to be like a great coach and also for being a great competitor? Because I know those two things can take a lot of your time, and trying to balance between the two has got to be hard.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to sort of a time management thing, because I coach a few times a week, but it's not the coaching in a class. It's an allotted space of time, and you just work for that time and then you train. So that doesn't really take much away from your training. But if you have students who are invested in you and think you're a really good coach and want to learn stuff from you, and want you to review uh, they want you to review their competition footage, or even privates, can take up a lot of time and energy. And for me, I try and invest my time in students right now because I have limited amount of time. I try and only really invest myself in students who are serious about jiu-jitsu, or at least just care about getting better. If I see someone that really wants to be good at jiu-jitsu and is really trying their best and taking what I'm teaching them, or what they're learning off an instructional, and putting it into practice, I want to help them. But you have limited amount of time, and I think people around me understand that. You have to be selfish as an athlete, and not just in the gym. Somewhat in your personal life, you have to like you have to say no to things. You have to say no to people when you don't want to be able to like be as focused as you possibly can on this goal, because there's a shitload of people who are trying to do the same thing as you. It's extremely competitive, and even if you're really good, you still might not make it. So you better be as possible good as you possibly can be. So I think generally people around me like understand that I have limited time, but um, when once my competitive career is sort of over to a certain degree, I'd love to be more hands-on in the coaching aspect and help people even more. And I think I'll be more able to do it as well. So I think it's just right now investing in myself as a product, and then later on I'll be able to help other people.
What makes a good student in your eyes?
Um, what makes a good student? Well, I was going to say someone who listens to you, but I would say probably more concisely that it's important that they question everything you teach them too.
Mm.
Um, I think you have to. A good student is someone who takes learning into their own hands. I would say everyone I know who's ever gotten good at jiu-jitsu didn't apart from someone like Gordon Ryan, who's pretty much learned everything from Danaher, and in that specific context, it makes sense because Danaher is the best coach in the world. He's there assessing your jiu-jitsu as much as he can, and I think if you have someone like that, which there really isn't many people around, it makes sense to just listen to them. But everyone else I know has taken learning into their own hands. Almost everything they learn, they generally don't learn from classes. They learn from watching instructionals, doing their own research, finding their favorite grapplers and trying to emulate them and stuff like that. So I just think someone who, has a good attitude, understands that it's going to be a long road and trying to speed that process up as fast as they can. Finding grapplers that they really like and trying to emulate them, and then just throwing themselves into competition and putting themselves in difficult situations, and basically just not being a pussy, because that's that's a big thing. You know, you have to be able to, you know, most people can do a really hard training session, but the hard thing is getting up the next day when your body's extremely sore and you're fucking tired and you don't want to do it, and making yourself go and do it. And the same thing is for competition, and especially like watching tape and watching instructionals. Most people don't want to do that either. So you've got to be disciplined. Discipline is probably the biggest thing.
Is that
Yeah.
the way you were a student when you were coming up the ranks? Is that why you made brown belt so quickly?
Yeah, I would say it's. I would say it's. Yeah, I would say I don't think there's anything particularly unique that I do. I just think someone like Joseph Chen or something like that who's come up really, really quick. I don't think there's that much secret to it. I think he's studied exactly what he's doing. He's been extremely disciplined about it. He's loved it, and he's been really enthusiastic. So that helps a lot. But I don't think there's much secret. I mean, people have their different methodologies of learning, and they're like the ecological approach is a big one that's going on around at the moment, which I'm a fan of to a certain degree. Um, and I think I would say one more thing is like, and this is a big one, I think is like one, optimizing your stress outputs. So like optimizing your energy outputs, for example, and figuring out exactly how you can get the most volume of training in a week without breaking your body. That's a big one. So whatever that might be, whether that's having a hard day and a light day, but you're still training twice a day, whether that's doing lots of rounds with a lower intensity and then separating your harder rounds for another day, all that kind of stuff, how you sleep, how you eat, when you work out, like all of these kind of things. If you can optimize that as much as you can get a much bigger volume of training in, and then trying to be as efficient as you can with exactly how you're learning jiu-jitsu as well. Like those, if you can like get really good at both of those things, and I would recommend just listening to any, like John Danaher's podcast and Lex Friedman are super, super good. He talks about a lot of his training methodologies and how to get good at jiu-jitsu and how to drill properly. That's another thing, knowing how to drill properly, and actually how to roll at 20%, 30%, 40%, and using another really good one is like using so let's say you've just learned a new technique, right? And you want to apply it. You're not going to be able to apply it straight on a world champion black belt. The first thing you do is you take it to a white belt who's probably lighter than you, and then you smash them with it, and then you take it to a blue belt, and you build it up this way. And it's just like the integration of techniques is a much smoother process, because then not only are you hitting it straight away, you're hitting it correctly straight away. And then I think any time you're doing a technique badly, it's bad for your jiu-jitsu, because it's reaffirming those motor patterns in your body, to basically do the technique wrong. So I would just say, like, try and do every technique you learn perfectly from the get-go. Yeah.
That's one thing that I've noticed about, to your point earlier, you talk about taking, when you come back from a break, like an injury or something like that, you're so enthusiastic about getting back on the mats. You have like the intent of, I can't wait to get back, and you're really focusing on it. One thing that I've noticed too is sometimes I'll form bad habits that I don't realize I'm doing because I'm training
Yeah.
so much, and then I come back and my techniques, once I get, motor movements back, understanding it, my technique feels better. It feels sharper. I'm like, oh shit, like I guess I was doing that kind of wrong because I was like so focused on just being there as much as possible, and I didn't think about the being completely technical. But now that I'm back, I know I have to slow down. I know I have to ease back into it. My technique kind of gets better. Do you notice that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I've sometimes had, like, I think when I was coming up, I would go out and get incredibly drunk and come in extremely hungover, and I'm like, okay, I have to go light today because otherwise I'm going to have a heart attack or something.
I don't
And
recommend
then
this for the people listening at home. If
no, do it. This is you have to do this. This is what will get you good at jiu-jitsu. Just go and get absolutely blackout drunk, maybe take some other substances, and then come in the next day. And the only way you don't have a heart attack is by going light, and that's how you get good at jiu-jitsu. No, but like, um, no, but yeah, like in those situations, I started being really technical, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm actually doing better now somehow. That was like one of the first eye-opening things for me. That was just part of the process. But yeah, I think you can do another thing about, like, being away from the mats for a long time. I think you can. I think a lot, if not most, of my progression on the mats has been done off of the mats. Like, thinking about, you know, adjustments I need to make and problems that I faced in the role and that kind of thing, and then technically making adjustments in my head and then doing them when I go back to training. Like, I think mental work and like mental, like, going over, having that obsession, just constant thinking of jiu-jitsu. Maybe not the healthiest thing, but if you want to get good at jiu-jitsu, it works. Yeah.
what do you think separates a great competitor that's crushes at local competitions, does great in the gym, drops in at other academies, does great, versus like a professional high level ADCC competitor that competes on the world stage like you have with like Polaris, ADCC, gone to all these gyms? What do you think separates the person that's good locally versus the person that's good globally?
Um, I think, I mean, for one, it's definitely technical, but I also think it can be a mindset thing. I think some people think, oh, they have an idea of themselves, right? They have an idea like, oh yeah, I'm a really good jiu-jitsu competitor, but I'm not Gordon Ryan, or I'm not Nicky Rod, or Craig Jones or something like that. And I think if a lot of people get caught up in that. I would say it's a mainly mental thing, because if you decide that's what I'm going to be, you will push everything out of your way in order to find it. And I think for me, it's been tough. I've had a lot of moments like, oh, I'm going to just be a decent local competitor and then open up a gym. But that's not where I'm at right now at all. And I think part of it was I was lucky enough to go and train with these people. And I was like, shit, I train just as hard as they do. I train just as regularly as they do. I know a lot of the things they know. And I'm actually really good at jiu-jitsu. And
Surprise.
some people aren't lucky enough to have those experiences to be able to fly out to America and do this stuff. And I was. But I think what you realize is they're just like you.
I think now more than ever, I think people think you have to be in person to learn from someone, and maybe the people who are training with Dana have all these little secrets. And I will tell you from training there is definitely some stuff he does not show in his instructions, that's for sure. And they're like secret techniques. He absolutely, I can't say what they are because I'd have to kill you, but they
Well, I mean, I'm over in the US, so I'm good.
But I think just with instructionals and watching tape alone, you can do so much, and it's underrated. And then travel to your local gyms and do that too. But I would say for anyone who has those doubts or whatever, take it from me that anyone who's done something at a really high level, they're just like you, but they're just extremely dedicated and they stay on the path for longer. That's a big one. There's someone like, look at someone like Kieran, what's his name? Oh, can't remember his name. He's a 10th Planet guy. He's really, really good. It's going to annoy me. Keith Krikorian, sorry, that's his name. He lost trials 10 times in a row. I don't even know how that's possible because that's over the span of 20 years. Maybe it wasn't 10 times. It was a lot of times. And then in 2019 or whenever it was, he went and won trials and then he just made it, And I think, he just kept his nose down, kept competing, kept training and kept getting better. And eventually so many people drop out that you can't not succeed if you just stay in. So I just think being in the game for as long as you can, believing in yourself and believing that you can actually do it is a big one. And then just making sure you do everything you possibly can to get to that goal, but also having that goal too. If you just mill around doing jiu-jitsu and competing, but you don't really have anything you're aiming at, I mean, you could, I'm not saying nothing will come of it, but it's a lot better to aim as high as you possibly can and then just shoot for it as much as you can than to, be without direction. So yeah, those are my main things I would say.
What's the biggest difference between competitors in, let's say, America, Danaher, B Team, all these places over here in America versus in the UK, and why are we so much better at jiu-jitsu?
I would argue with you, but you just literally are so much better than us at jiu-jitsu. Well, I don't know. Maybe In-N-Out Burger's pretty good. That might have something to do. No, I mean, what's the difference? I think as a country, you're much more competitive in nature. I think that helps the overall attitude. You get a lot of, you have wrestling as part of growing up, and it's very much you're taught, from what I understand. I mean, I'm English. I didn't grow up in America, but I'm guessing you all got taught to always try and come first place, and if you're not first, you're lost, all that kind of thing. So that probably helps. But I think England for a while had the same thing that the lower level competitors have of oh well, we're England and we can't compete against America because they're just better and we don't have what they have. I think we have a lot of what you guys have now. I just think you guys have a much bigger volume of better athletes, and you guys have got Danaher living there. I mean, it's mostly centralized around Texas now, but you've got amazing athletes out in San Diego and New York. Literally, east to west coast is just there's every state you can go into and just find an amazing gym. So I would say the main thing is just your volume of athletes that you've got. We're slowly, there's a lot of really good athletes coming out of England. We've got people like Owen Flanagan. Owen Jones just won ADCC trials, and there's just a ton of talent coming through the UK right now. But yeah, to answer your question, it's I would just say you guys have a much bigger volume of athletes at the moment, but I hope you guys hold on to these memories because they're
Hey, it was Brazil for a long time, right? And then America slowly started taking over. No, I talked to Mike Bates, who is from the UK, and he has his own academy over there. And it's a Gracie Baja Livingston, I think what it is. But he was talking about how he has 300-400 members in his academy alone now, and I think it's cool seeing other places in the world starting to blow up. I mean, you guys have Hodger Gracie. He's been there since the early 2000s, right? So it's getting much bigger over there, which is cool to see. And I like it because it it allows for more competitive jiu-jitsu, more knowledge to grow. It allows better opportunities instead of it just being focused in one area, because it brings more minds into it. You know what I mean? So it's definitely cool seeing other places in the world getting better at jiu-jitsu, bringing up world star athletes. In your eyes, who's, besides yourself, obviously, who do you see coming up in the UK that's, making a good spot on the scene that people should look out for?
Well, people who should, well, coming up, I would say Owen Flanagan, but I feel like he's not really coming up anymore. He's pretty much made it. But
Mm-hmm.
like him, I think like one of the first guys was Ross Nichols, because Ross Nichols was the first guy I'm aware of who was like an English grappler in ADCC. There might be other ones too, but like he was the first guy I was aware of who'd like competed in ADCC, and people were like, oh, JT Torres couldn't pass his card. I was like, what the fuck? And I trained with him, so he was like a pioneer. But like right now, yeah, we've got Owen O'Flanagan coming. He's just amazing at what he does. I get to train with him like reasonably often. And then Owen Jones just won under 66 trials, so congratulations to him. That's fucking sick. He's a really good grappler. Who else would I say is coming up who's really good? Well, we obviously have Owen Livesey now, but he's not really coming up anymore. He's done really, really well. I'm trying to think of someone who's not a direct competitor of mine that I don't like.
It's so basically, if Ollie didn't mention your name, he doesn't like you.
I can't really think of that many people off the top of my head. Oh, Shane Curtis is really good.
Yeah, Shane Curtis, the goth kid.
Yeah,
I like him a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know who he is. Yeah.
Shane's really good. I think he's quite underrated, to be honest. I think he's going to do really well.
I saw a video of him, just to talk about him real quick. I saw a video of him. I'm pretty sure he blew up after this, but he was fully in a rear naked choke, and he got out of it during a competition. Yeah. And that reel like blew up, and that's how I found him, was on Instagram. I started following him. So
yeah, he did that on Polaris. Shane's cool because he's like found a really cool brand for himself as well, and that's something that's really important as a jiu-jitsu athlete. It's something I probably haven't. Because I'm not a money focused person. It's just not something that motivates me. I'm interested in living a life that is full of like working towards who I want to be rather than what I have. That's the main thing for me, I would say. But yeah, Shane's done a really good job of marketing himself and branding himself with all the goth stuff and his tattoos and his look, and he's just an interesting guy. So yeah, I would say him. Yeah, I'm really struggling to think of other people for some reason, but I'm sure if any of other ones come to me throughout the episode, I'll tell you.
What do you think? It always interests me when I talk to like brown belts, especially when they're like high level competitors or they've been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time. And I'm always curious, what do you think it's going to take for you to earn your black belt? Like, where do you feel that you need to go in order for you to earn your black belt?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, for me, like black belt was always a thing that motivated me, but now it's very different. I don't know. I think if I won ADCC trials and I got my black belt, I'd be happy with that. I think like for me, it's more like I want to get to a level where I'm undoubtedly world class, like one of the best brown belts in the world before I get my black belt. That's what I'd like to do. So for me, winning ADCC trials solidifies you. You can't argue with it, and it is you are one of the best grapplers in the world at your weight. And I think if you're that doesn't matter what belt you are. I think if you get a black belt after winning ADCC trials, it just makes sense. Some people win it when they're a blue belt, but I just think like, But the other thing is, there's a potential and I haven't signed anything. This isn't like an announcement or anything, but there's a potential I'd like to have an MMA fight before I get my black belt as well.
Why is that?
Well, it depends, because if things really blow up for me in jiu-jitsu, I don't want to go and get injured doing an MMA fight. But let's say, for example, trials didn't go my way, I'd definitely consider having one, because I think it would be a nice thing for me to have, saying, not only am I a high level grappler, but my grappling skills work in a MMA fight and they work in a real fighting scenario. And therefore, anyone who learns from me is not only going to be, I'm not only qualified to teach jiu-jitsu, but I'm also qualified to teach people how to fight and defend themselves. And that's always something that's been really important to me about jiu-jitsu. I didn't get into jiu-jitsu necessarily for a sports reason. I got into it because I wanted to learn how to fight without getting hit in the face too much. So, but I did a lot of that growing up too, so I know what that's like. But yeah, I think that would be a cool thing to be able to have before I get my black belt. And I think it's a lot of thing. It's something that a lot of black belts are missing out on. You know, I think you should as a black belt in jiu-jitsu be able to call yourself a fighter, in my opinion, and you should be able to defend yourself and have skills, like real life skills with your jiu-jitsu. I would be very disappointed in myself if I got to black belt and all I'd done was sit around in the gi and play lapel guard. You know, because it's just useful. It's just useful in a vacuum, and it. Yeah. So for me, like the self-defense and fighting aspect of jiu-jitsu is very important. So yeah, that's basically why.
Perfect. Well, Ollie, I always like to end the show with the same question. If you could give a piece of advice to a brand new white belt, what would it be?
If you want to get your ass kicked, come and challenge me in my gym, and I'll happily do it for you. But I would say, don't take for granted like how lucky we are to do what we do, and try and love the process as much as you can, because wherever you're trying to get to, whether it's just getting a blue belt, a black belt, or ADCC champion, if you don't enjoy the journey, it's pointless. One, you might not make it, and two, you might make it and it might not fulfill you as much as you think it would. So the end of the journey in the end is you're going to die and have to stop doing jiu-jitsu, get old and have to stop doing jiu-jitsu anyway. So just try and enjoy every part of it, and yeah, that's my main advice.
Perfect. Well, if people want to check you out and see your journey through jiu-jitsu and ADCC trials, where can they find you at?
So my Instagram is at OG Webb on Instagram. I'm sponsored by Progress, so you always see me popping up on there, or maybe on the Grapple Club as well. I'm going to be starting a Patreon where we're going to have a lot of footage from the gym, whether that's like a full class I'm teaching, specific techniques. I'm going to be offering like competition reviewing and just like specialized techniques, anything you want to learn about jiu-jitsu. And yeah, so be sure to look out for that. It'll be advertised on Instagram. And also a big shout out to Progress, who've been sponsoring me for a long time and always been great to me, and Ascend Performance with Rob Nittman, who's been doing my strength conditioning for years. Yeah.
Perfect. Hey, and Progress just picked up Heisam Rita.
They did.
Like,
funny actually, just an ending note. We went to there, and he was, so I'm sponsored by Progress too. I wish I got a picture, but my friend looks a little bit like Owen Jones, but more fat. And he told my friend that, he goes, "You're not Owen Jones," and he was like, "Yeah." He goes, "You look like Owen Jones if he was fat." So yeah, shout out to Heisam, because we basically been calling him Fat Owen Jones every day since. So yeah.
That's so funny. Hey, well, Ollie, I just want to say thank you so much, man, for your time today. This is a great conversation. I'm sure people are going to find lots of value in it, and I wish you the best of luck with ADCC and your competitive career. I'll be watching it from the sidelines. That's not for me, but good for you.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you for your time. I really enjoyed talking to you, and yeah, stay in touch, brother. And
absolutely.
If I'm ever out
all right, guys,
part of the world,
thank you so much for listening and watching. If I'm over in the UK, is that what you're saying?
I was just saying, if I'm ever in that part of the world, I'll train with you. And the same, if you ever come here, you're welcome to come train at my gym.
Absolutely, dude. So thank you guys so much for listening and watching at home. Be sure to go check out Ollie and check out the sponsor down below and everything like that. And remember, no oil checks here. Peace.